This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Well, isn't it nice that at least traditional bank holiday weather is back, with many of us going to get a complete dousing this afternoon, and this on the day when the Pope, as we speak, has arrived in Knock in the west coast of Ireland, where it's wet and windy, where he'll give, I think, the fourth speech in 2 days that he's given, and the Pope acknowledging many of the things that have gone wrong in the Catholic Church in the past, in particular the way that many young children were treated and abused. We will get, at some point in the next couple of hours, we'll go live to the stadium in Knock and find out exactly what he has to say today. We've also learnt overnight that Senator John McCain, veteran of US politics, he's been in the US Senate since the 1980s, has died overnight after a long battle with brain cancer. McCain, of course, famous for being captured in Vietnam and treated very, very badly indeed, and probably President Trump's most vociferous high-profile critic within the Republican Party over the course of the last 18 months or so. We'll talk a bit about John McCain. But the story that really grips me this morning is, I grew up thinking that, it was the Conservative Party who were the capitalists. It was the Conservative Party who were hard-hearted. It was the Conservative Party that believed economic success mattered more than anything. And it was the Labour Party that were the caring party that really were very inclusive, wanted to fight against all forms of discrimination. And it was Theresa May herself who sort of damned her own party in a move that politically probably wasn't very wise, when she talked about the nasty party. The Tories were seen as the nasty party, and yet, over the last few weeks, barely a day seems to go by when we don't get a story of some kind that Jeremy Corbyn appeared on a platform with Hamas, being photographed at a martyr's cemetery with people directly involved with organisations that one who killed a British rabbi, and there, standing by graves of some who committed murder at the Munich Olympics of 1972. And behind all of that, online, apparently horrendous things being said between Labour activists, and much of it directed at Jewish Labour MPs. So we really have sunk to something, haven't we, when we learn that at next month's Labour Party conference, Labour MPs will be given bodyguards for their own safety amid the raging anti-Semitism row. I find it almost beyond belief that actually the Labour Party has reached that. And I wonder now whether it's fair to say that maybe it's the Labour Party that have now become the nasty party of British politics. And I have to say, some of their hard left activists, I've come up against, they've stood outside my meetings shouting racist. It seems to be about the highest form of intellectual debate they can ever engage upon. One of the most prominent doing it to me in meetings in Kent is now suspended from the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. I would use the word irony, but I'm afraid I can't do that now because Jeremy Corbyn used that, of course, didn't he? He said that some British Zionists, despite the fact they've lived here all their lives, have no sense of British irony. Creating, I think many felt, an us and them. If any of you listened yesterday to Majeed Nawaz's show, it was quite extraordinary. British Jewish people ringing up Majeed, a couple of them in tears, saying they fear that if Mr Corbyn becomes Prime Minister, they may have to leave this country. I mean, it's unbelievable how bad, how ugly, how nasty this is. Now, that's my perception. But hey, I'm asking you, do you think the Labour Party have become the nasty party? If you think no, absolutely not. The Tories have got that title. They're the hard-hearted ones. They always will be. Then call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, actually, do you know what? Every week that goes by, it gets nastier and nastier. And I now think they've taken the title. Then text to 84850. Or is Corbyn right when he says, actually, this is all an unfair media taking his comments out of context? And as John McDonnell said yesterday, all Mr Corbyn has ever sought is peace. If that's how you feel, please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook and you can comment there too. I'm going to go first to somebody who I'm guessing is probably holding his head in his hands with disbelief. A former strategist for the Labour Party, senior policy advisor in 2004-05 and director of political operations 05 to 07 to Tony Blair. In many ways, Labour's golden days. John McTernan, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, when you were there, the Labour Party was inclusive. There were no... Yeah. There was never a suggestion during Tony Blair's period of office of discrimination against any group. What on earth has happened to your party?
I'm afraid the Labour Party has never had this kind of association. It's never had these people in the Labour Party. They've come in because of the change of leadership. The strand of politics on the far left is well known. People on the far left who've got anti-Semitism as core to their politics. They're now in the Labour Party. They've been welcomed in by Jeremy Corbyn. He opened the door to them, he and John McDonnell. And the Corbynite Labour Party, it was already, we heard before that Laura Kuenssberg, the BBC political editor, had to have...
That was last year's conference, wasn't it? Yeah.
And now we've got Jewish MPs going to have protection. That is a nastiness that's been brought into the heart of the Labour Party by Jeremy Corbyn. He's responsible for this because it does rest with the leader ultimately, but he's also responsible for the remarks which have scared, shocked, frightened the Jewish community in Britain, and I would not be surprised if people think that we are now in competition for the title of the nasty party.
So only in competition, in your view, John?
I think Theresa May, with what she does on disability benefits, Theresa May, what she does in other parts of the welfare reform, she's keeping in contention for the title of nasty party.
Okay, well, it's a pretty ugly contest then, whichever way you look at it. But the real question is, you made it clear that these people are now in control, and of course it was Ed Miliband that opened up the concept of the £3 member. Not that Ed Miliband would ever have wanted anything like this to happen. But the real question is, what on earth happens now? How do you and people like you, lifelong Labour people who care about the Labour Party and its message, how do you reclaim it? Indeed, can you now reclaim it from the Corbynistas?
We're still the Labour Party. We still have a very powerful trade union movement. Almost all the trade union leaders are moderate. Almost all the trade union leaders regard what Jeremy Corbyn has done with disgust. Unfortunately, Len McCluskey at Unite has chosen to use his position as the General Secretary to attack the Jewish community, to claim that he doesn't understand what they want. He's got the same tone of voice, the same exasperated tone of voice that Jeremy Corbyn uses. And I often think that there's something very, Jeremy Corbyn talked about how these British Zionists, by which he meant British Jews, how British Jews have lived here, they don't understand our ways, they need lessons, They don't understand English irony. It's a very, very English lower middle class form of racism that masquerades as exasperation with those who won't fit in. And I think the nastiest thing about that is the way that tone has spread and the way that you see his followers over the last few weeks on Twitter and social media. They find defences even when he has changed his mind. He wasn't there while he was. He didn't lay a wreath while he did. He didn't know it was Black September. Well, actually, he did. It's the ways in which he's got a movement that constantly changes position. That is intimidating. And I think that the way to take the Labour Party back is for the trade union movement to come to its senses and to say this is doing no good for working people. Doing no good for working people, whether they're black or they're Asian or whether they're Jewish or whether they're white working class. It's a distraction from what the Labour Party should be doing, but it's worse than that now. It's a virus that's eating away at the Labour Party.
Yeah, I'm afraid that even the trade union movement argument doesn't work when, as you say yourself, Len McCluskey, the biggest and most powerful of all the trade union leaders, has said some very provocative things. I listened to Mike Gapes yesterday, Labour MP, outright calling his own leader a racist and an anti-Semite and saying, I've had enough. Now, there are reports, and obviously we're always careful about reports in newspapers, but reports that Peter Mandelson's been holding a series of breakfasts. I mean, Does it come to the point for MPs like Mike Gapes where, frankly, as a matter of principle, all they can do is leave the party and try and help form a new centre party?
Well, as you know, in September, when MPs come back, the Labour MPs are going to vote on whether to adopt the IHRA full definition of anti-Semitism and to put it in their rules. That's going to be a major flashpoint, because the rules of the Parliamentary Labour Party are for MPs to make. They also have to be approved by the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, dominated by Corbynites. If Corbyn's faction in the Labour Party decide to prevent MPs from having a definition of anti-Semitism which is internationally recognised, we'll know why it is. I often wondered why they were so stubborn. Then that tape came out from the 2013 intervention by Corbyn. The Corbynites are defending Jeremy Corbyn, because if the PLP change their rules, he will be open to discipline by the PLP rules because he's broken the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. That's what's making Mike Gapes so angry. That's what's making so many Labour MPs angry. People will work within the rules until it's impossible to work within the rules to reverse this appalling takeover of the Labour Party. And as for Peter has breakfast all the time. People
yeah, of course he does. But at what... Okay, finally, John McTernan, at what point do you decide that you can't stick with the Labour Party?
I'm in Harriet Harman's constituency. I've been in her constituency since the 90s. I will always work for a Labour MP as election when that's a Labour MP whose views I support. Once Momentum start, or once the Corbynites really start sweeping through, deselecting decent MPs, replacing them with far-left MPs, that's the moment at which everybody will have to consider their position in the Labour Party.
Yeah, OK. John, thank you. Well, that was John McTernan, former strategist for Tony Blair, and he couldn't have been clearer, could he? He could not have been clearer about what Corbyn has done to the Labour Party. Boy, it's not only a mess, but they do, to me, look like the nasty party. In fact, the very, very nasty party. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in OBC. And it's 10:16. Well, I thought that interview with John McTernan, former Blair personal advisor before the break, was very, very telling. I was saying, have the Labour Party now become the nasty party as the anti-Semitism row just gets worse and worse? And I thought he'd say to me, well, we've got a problem, Nigel, but we'll deal with it. That wasn't what he said. What he said is the Corbynites have taken over the party. And his fear now is that they will go round constituency by constituency, getting rid of moderate Labour MPs and replacing them with extremists. I think they are the nasty party. You tell me I'm wrong. 0345 6060 973. Right, my next caller is Valerie from Lambeth, who's new to this show. Valerie, good morning.
Good morning to you. Well, I agree with the last speaker, absolutely, except I don't think the whole party is the nasty party. I think these creatures that have taken over the party are not only nasty, they make me sick to my stomach. Corbyn went to lay the wreath at the grave of those murderers,
yes.
And then when it came out now that they tortured those young athletes to death, they castrated one gorgeous young man and broke their bones of all the others. And while they held them as prisoners, instead of saying, oh, I'm disgusted now, how disgusting thing to do, he hasn't said a word about it. He doesn't say a word about Christians being tortured all over the Middle East by the Arabs. He doesn't say a word about gay people being thrown off the tallest buildings in Gaza. I just despise him utterly.
And yet, Valerie, I listened to John McDonnell yesterday morning. He said, you have to understand that Jeremy has always sought peace. And the implication of that was, well, when you're seeking peace, you have to speak to all sorts of people. To my knowledge, Valerie, Jeremy Corbyn has never had a single meeting with the Israelis to try and seek peace on both sides of this dispute in that troubled part of the world.
That's right. And he has been... Nobody in the Labour Party is trying to speak up for the Kurds. They're being tortured to death right now, today. Nobody tries to save the Christians being thrown off the tallest buildings. I simply can't believe that he even dares to say that he's trying to seek peace. What peaceful thing has he ever done?
Well, yeah, but of course, he was always considered, of course, Valerie, to be a sort of a very eccentric, extreme backbencher and somebody who could be comfortably ignored. Valerie, tell me, are you a member of the Labour Party?
My husband was the chief whip of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and when I was running Labour Friends of Israel, I said, what about this Corbyn? He's a complete non-entity. Don't take any notice of him. In those days, we were worried about Tony Benn and militant tendency.
So your husband was a Labour MP for how long?
For 30 years. He was the chief whip for 12 years.
Right, OK, that's Michael Cox. Yes. Well, Valerie, so the Labour Party's been a huge part of your life.
Of course, I've never voted anything else but Labour, but now I haven't even got anyone to vote for.
So what happens, Valerie? I mean, do you stay a member of the Labour Party and hope...
No, I've already left. I wouldn't be in the same party as Corbyn and McDonnell and John Lansman, who's the Jewish one, who's worse than any of them, in my opinion.
And do you see any resolution to... I mean, Valerie, clearly you agree with me that they are the nasty party in every sense, but...
I don't think the whole party. Most of my friends in Labour are very nice people and want to help people. But this cohort that have taken over the party, it's a tragedy. My husband must be spinning in his grave.
How, Valerie, can it be saved, in your view?
Only by getting rid of this lot of people and having the normal, decent Labour MPs that they want to get rid of, saving them and saving their jobs, and having the same old Labour Party. When I was running Labour Friends of Israel, Harold Wilson was the president.
Yep.
Lord Glenamara, who'd been the Deputy Prime Minister, was the Vice President, and Ian Mercado, who was a left-wing Labour Jewish MP, was a chairman. The whole Labour Party was pro-Israel, and look what the Arabs are doing. Look what the Arabs are doing to the Kurds now. For God's sake, somebody has to help them.
I know, there's some horrible, awful things going on. Valerie, I want to thank you for that call. Very, very much indeed. Thank you. Well, that was Valerie, a very, very, very heartfelt call from somebody whose late husband was a Labour MP and the Labour chief whip, and she ran Labour Friends of Israel. Harold Wilson was the president. Haven't times changed? Ben is calling from Clacton in Essex. Ben, hello.
Hello, I've got a question for you, Nigel.
I've got a question for you. Is Labour now the nasty party?
My question first.
Oh, Ben, you're going to be one of these very boring people. Is the Labour Party now the nasty party?
No, I'll ask you a question before I begin.
Oh, dear. Cheers, Ben. Bye-bye. Let's go to James in Bournemouth. James, good morning.
Nigel, hi there. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you.
To answer the question, because the last person clearly couldn't without waffling, are they? Yeah, absolutely they are. I think it speaks volumes when you've got Nick Griffin and the KKK.
Yes, David Duke of the Ku Klux Klan and Nick Griffin tweeting, "Go Jezza."
Nigel, you were criticised for putting a poster up during the referendum over Brexit.
Yes.
Look at the heat you took for that. As a non-practicing, and all my friends would know me, would say I'm the most non-practicing person they know. A belief in the state of Israel is something that goes through the core of most British Jews. And stands up and condescendingly tells me that I need a history lesson. Okay.
Do you get irony, James?
Oh, absolutely.
Because what Corbyn was saying was that even though you might have grown up here, if you're Jewish, somehow you have a different perception of humour in the world.
What's incredible is I'm a serving police officer.
Yep.
I'm therefore non-political. But it's interesting that the one party that if I wanted to vote for, the BNP, for example, I couldn't because I would lose my job. I wonder how far we are, seriously, from the Labour Party being added to that, because frankly, as a British Jew, I'm getting to the stage where I don't know how anyone can support that man anymore. It's getting to a point where...
James, they do. James, a lot of people still do. And there are still, and I've spoken to a few in the last couple of days, still young people out there who say, look, he's a good man, he wants peace, and the media are just being unfair to him.
He doesn't meet the Israeli side?
No, never.
He did the same with the IRA as well. That is not a man of peace. That's a man who we're constantly told has principles. But I'm watching a man laying a wreath at ceremonies for terrorists. Listen, at the end of the day, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. And unfortunately, with Corbyn, from what I see and the way he responds and the condescending manner in which he referred to as my people, ultimately, as them and they.
Yeah, that was the problem, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I tell you what, James, if I'd come close to that, I think I probably would have had to emigrate. Such would have been the abuse. James, I thank you for your call. And by the way, that previous caller I got rid of, I want you to come and tell me that I'm wrong. I want you to come and tell me you support Corbyn and what is happening here is unfair and a gross misinterpretation. But, the point of the show is we have a theme to debate. Let's debate it. You can always ask me a supplementary, but don't come on. This is not Mastermind. I'm not, So please play the game, and you'll always get a chance to ask me a question. I'll always do my very best to answer it. But don't, for goodness sake, please play the game. Let's go to Ed in Blackheath. Ed, good morning.
Well, thank you, Nigel, for having me on. I take a very different view to yourself.
Right, let's hear it.
I've been a Labour Party member for 40 years. I've known Jeremy Corbyn for about 40 years. There's nothing nasty about him. What he's done, he's raised the issue of the war between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I personally don't take sides in that war. It's very regrettable. I think it's important that it's debated, and it's not nasty to debate a Middle Eastern war. There are enough of them going on. And I think the thing is, my criticism of you, I'm sorry, Nigel, is you ask for open debate, honest debate about immigration, Europe, the cities, all this kind of thing. This is the centre of this debate, which you're now sucked into, is trying to take sides in a war. Well, I want peace in the Middle East. I don't want to back one side or the other. And I think if the United Nations and other big institutions will put their minds to this, maybe there would be peace between Palestine and Israel.
All right, Ed, I know, I hear what you say, but let me say this back to you. If Jeremy Corbyn is this peace broker, which is the way that John McDonnell tried to portray him yesterday morning, surely, Ed, if he was a peace broker, he would have met both sides.
Well, he has met both sides. I know for a fact that he's met friends of mine who are Jewish. He's met them in Parliament. He's met people who are very closely associated with the Israeli government. I think that's a bit of a slur to say that.
Well, one of my
Jewish lobby.
One of my previous callers, Ed, was a lady called Valerie Cox, who used to run the Labour Friends of Israel group, and she made it perfectly clear in her phone call he'd never engage with them.
Well, I don't agree with her. I know for certain that he's met Jewish people living in London and Jewish people who live abroad.
Okay.
I don't understand. But my main point is there going to be peace in the Middle East? What do you want? Do you want peace in the Middle East? And how are we going to...
Well, of course, Ed.
How are we going to put forward the Palestinian point of view? And when we do, people always get language wrong. If any subject, people get language wrong and make mistakes. And that's the part of debate. And I think the courtesy of debate is to listen to both sides and forget their language sometimes, because of course it's going to be wrong. Of course people are going to make mistakes.
Do you want a two-state solution, Ed?
I want a country in the Middle East where Jews, Arabs, Muslims, Christian Jews can all live happily together. That's what I want. I don't necessarily agree with a two-state solution.
Do you think Israel has a right to exist?
I do think it's got a right to exist, but they have also got the obligation to talk to the warring factions in the Middle East.
Okay.
Why don't they talk sensibly?
Ed, let me ask you just one more quick question, because we've got to run after that. Would it be fair to judge a man by the company he keeps? And hasn't Jeremy Corbyn spent a little bit too much time with people directly linked to terrorist groups?
Well, I've actually been to some of these meetings that you're referring to.
Okay.
Nigel. But I mean, as far as I know, Hamas was we insist on democratic elections in Lebanon and places like that, and Hamas were elected. I mean, I think and the Israeli government are sort of busily firing bullets at children. I mean, I think if you laid... it's very difficult, isn't it? And even the British government has done shocking things. As that chap who's on earlier, who was criticising Corbyn, presumably he was supporting the Iraq War and trying to propagate it amongst...
Well, that's almost certainly probably the case, Ed, and there are many hypocrisies in this. So, OK, Ed, Jeremy Corbyn's a good man, yeah? I've lost him. Right, that was Ed, a very strong pro-Corbyn supporter, which is why I gave him as much time as I did. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It is now 10:31 and time for the news with Thomas Watts. Has Labour become the nasty party? I think it has. The hard left have taken it over, and we're seeing Corbyn just mixing with the most appalling terrorist-type people and saying things about British Zionists, brackets Jews, that are really deeply unpleasant. But before we get back to that, and by the way, I want both sides of this debate. Overnight, we've learnt that Arizona Senator, long-serving politician John McCain has died at the age of 81 after a long battle against brain cancer. McCain, remember, the Vietnam veteran, held for 5 years in captivity, very badly beaten during that time, ran as American president, real thorn in the side of Donald Trump over the course of the last 18 months or so. Our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks, reports on his life.
Senator McCain's death was announced by his office in Washington, a fitting decision given that he'd been a fixture here since the 1980s. He served 5 years in a Vietnamese prisoner of war camp, was tortured there, and brought to Washington a moral compass that allowed him to oppose even his own Republican Party when they favoured torture, or more recently, the scrapping of Obamacare. He loathed President Trump, and the feeling was mutual, though the president has tweeted a message of sympathy and respect to his family.
That was a short summation of the life there, political life as well, of John McCain. And his final public speech was made last October as he received the Liberty Medal from America's National Constitution Center. Let's hear him.
To abandon the ideals we have advanced around the globe, to refuse the obligations of international leadership and our duty to remain the last best hope of Earth for the sake of some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems is as unpatriotic as an attachment to any other tired dogma of the past that Americans consigned to the ash heap of history.
So even there, in the last months of his life and seriously ill, still a bit of fire burning there, wasn't there, in John McCain? I'm going to go to Bill Barnard, American political commentator and author of Dixiecrats and Democrats, and ask him, Bill, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think John McCain's legacy to American politics is?
I think it's an example of the kind of life, the principle of life, the life of character that one can lead in politics that is so often absent in today's world. It was harkening back to an older era. Maybe we look back with golden lenses on those kinds of people in the past, but we seem to have had a level of political ability and a level of political character that seems so often missing in today's politics.
Yes, I mean, we're so used, aren't we, all over the West, Bill, to career politicians who come straight from university into research offices, and then they become politicians, and they kind of do what the party tells them to do. McCain was not made of that stuff, was he?
He was not at all. I mean, he had shown himself in war, for example, to be a great national hero and an incredible example. I mean, the decision that he made not to accept the Vietnamese offer of early release because his father was an admiral, not to accept that offer until his own men could be released. It shows something of the character of the man, and
yes.
I think it's greatly to be admired.
Yes, and now for Donald Trump, of course, politically, it was the McCain vote, effectively, that stopped the Trump healthcare package from going through. What actually happens now to that Arizona seat?
Well, the Republican governor will nominate a replacement, name a replacement,
yep.
And that will continue to be filled until there's an election for the full term. So there will continue to be 51 Republicans in the state, in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate.
Right, and so that will be politically a relief for Donald Trump. I mean, he's not likely, is he, to get replaced by somebody quite as antagonistic towards him as John McCain was?
Well, I would prefer in this particular moment not to kind of dwell upon the controversies of the last years or so between McCain and Trump, but rather to dwell upon the life of this man of real character and real honor, a national hero in American politics. I mean, I come from the opposite political tradition,
sure.
And on many issues would have been opposed to John McCain, but you could never doubt that his position was taken from a point of principle and that he really believed in what he was doing. He had to adjust to political realities, to be sure, as anyone does who survives in political life, but nonetheless that core principle and character was there.
I think in some ways, Bill, he died as he lived. You know, he could, when he was first diagnosed with brain cancer, have gone away, and yet he decided to fight on for what he believed in. And I think that is an extraordinary thing for him to do. Bill Barnard, thank you. And that's a very interesting life of John McCain. And, you know, it is really important that we do, whether we agree with people politically or not, you know, we recognise them for what they are. And John McCain, there's no question, a man of principle, fighting for what he believed in, right up, virtually, until a couple of months before he died of brain cancer. I wish, in many ways, there were a lot more people in politics who did it because they believed in what they were doing. He certainly did. Let's go to Finchley in North London and speak to Ambrosine. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning. I want to bring us back to this Corbyn rhetoric and the anti-Semitism. On Wednesday, I was one of a group of Jews that went to an event which was entitled Jeremy Corbyn, Anti-Semitism and Justice. And I was part of a list of Jews that wasn't let into the meeting. We were standing there while our names were being called. Now, this is a three-pronged issue.
Are you a Labour Party member?
Never been. Always been a Conservative. It wasn't a Labour Party put-on event.
I'm just thinking, hang on a sec. So, but if you weren't a Labour Party member, why would you expect to have been let in?
Okay, so this event was a public event in Red Lion Square. It was put on by a conglomerate of organisations, including the PSC. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is a patron of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign.
Yep.
It was part of this particular, this event. This is outrageous. There were Jews standing outside. Our names were being called. We were on a list. And once we were walking up to the queue, we weren't let in. Now, there was Nazi memorabilia.
By whom? Who was stopping you going in?
There were loads of security there with little yellow sort of jackets with Stop the War emblems on, which had been rubbed out. But this event was held by three different types of organisation. It was, as I said, a conglomerate of organisation. It was
all right. Well, I mean, Ambrosine, without focusing too deeply on that meeting, because I don't really know the ins and outs of it. I really don't, whether it was invite or not. You said it was public, but I mean, you're a Labour Party supporter. Where do we go from here?
Well, first of all, I'm not a Labour Party supporter, but we've got a three-pronged problem here. We've had, and I'm Jewish, we've had a Jewish leadership for many years who we have fought against because they do not believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And now when you've had Jeremy Corbyn, who again is a patron of the PSC, who has constantly throughout his career criticised Israel in all different ways, has platformed on Al-Quds stages, PSC stages, whilst people behind him, and I've witnessed this, people behind him are shouting in Arabic to kill the Jews. We have this whole big issue.
Where was that happening?
Unless Jeremy Corbyn
where were people shouting in Arabic, kill the Jews?
We've been to the Al-Quds marches, which, as you know, are very prominent in London. They happen every year. He stood on platforms at Al-Quds while we're hearing this being screamed. It's all on video. It's all on film. It's all on photograph. I mean, he's been doing this for nearly a decade. So, you know, this is not just an issue that's happened over the past 3 years. This is something that has come up through the ranks of the Labour Party. And we will say this. We have an idea. We need the Jewish Labour MPs, Burgess, Smeeth, Katz. We need them to resign from the Labour Party to take a stand. We need the Jewish Labour movement, who are still part of the Labour Party and still campaigning for Labour.
But isn't the problem, Ambrosine, that if those Jewish Labour MPs, who, by the way, are going to have bodyguards provided for the Labour Party conference, if they all walk away, then isn't it total victory for the anti-Zionist movement?
No, it's not total victory. They need to walk away, and Corbyn needs to resign. We need to get Corbyn.
But it's not going to happen, is it?
No, and then it's not going to happen when the Jewish MPs are still there, and there are still...
All right, OK, Ambrosine, no, you've made your point. Ambrosine says the Jewish Labour MPs need to walk away. Others would take the view that would be something akin to surrender. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 10:46. Pope has just spoken and begged for the Lord's forgiveness for the sins of members of the Catholic Church who committed child sexual abuse, and we'll get a report from the West Coast of Ireland from Knock very, very shortly. For now, is the Labour Party now the nasty party? And on Facebook, Tunde says to me, stop this nonsense. JC is the best thing for years. Gwyn says, Nigel, is it because Labour are not Tory enough for you? No, Gwyn, I don't like the Tory party either. Diane says, Labour's gone to the dog's taxi for Corbyn. Some of you are even more cynical. They're all nasty parties, Nigel. They're all the same and all in it for themselves. And that actually is an attitude and an argument that I think is growing in this country. I've certainly detected that over the course of the last year or so. Let's go to Roberto, a new caller to this show who lives in Mitcham. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I just wanted to say that I totally disagree with what some people are saying, that the Labour Party is now a new nasty party. I don't think it's true at all. And I think Labour still stands for social justice.
Right. I mean, Roberto, it's not just the odd person saying it. Quite a lot of people are saying it.
Well, look, there's no question. The huge inflow of new members to Labour has, of course, brought its own problems. It's not a question. But I also think there's some misrepresentations, and you were guilty of one earlier on when you spoke to Blair's former spin doctor.
Yeah.
And you said that under Blair, Labour was an inclusive party and everything was hunky-dory. Of course it wasn't. You know, I remember very well the extraordinary, or should we say extrajudicial renditions, for example, that happened under Blair, colluding with a torture regime.
But Roberto, the point was, all of this came to light way after Blair had left office.
No, I'm sorry. I lived through the time, and there were clearly voices at the time who were saying this is happening, and Blair and Jack Straw at the time were being criticised for it. And of course that was borne out later in court cases as well.
Yes.
So I just don't think it is ever right to say, look, under Tony Blair or in whatever period, Labour was an inclusive party and now it has stopped being...
Well, Roberta, there's no question that when people look back at Tony Blair now, many will say his long-term legacy was the Iraq War, kowtowing to the Americans on many practices that we would not approve of, and I do understand that. But there was never any suggestion that there were groups within UK society that were excluded from the Labour Party or felt excluded from the Labour Party. Roberta, I'm not losing you, am I?
On NICAP, for example, and of course the way the whole war on terror was conducted could be construed as anti-Muslim, definitely. So, I would be careful with those things.
I don't think it was intended to be. I mean, what I'm saying to you, Roberto, is this. I listened to Majid Nawaz yesterday on LBC, and there were people ringing up, with tears during their telephone conversations saying, we're Jewish and we're frightened of this man becoming Prime Minister. This is a pretty extraordinary state of affairs, isn't it?
It is. It's saddening. It saddens me as well, and I'm sure it saddens Jeremy Corbyn as well. Unfortunately, I must say that there's been a lot of misrepresentation. And can I just refer to one particular instance as well? When you fell in line with that argument that when Jeremy Corbyn, in that clip that emerged 2 days ago, whenever it was, made reference to the Zionists in the audience, he was clearly referring to a group in the audience at that event at which the Palestinian ambassador was attacked. He was not using the term Zionist to refer to all Jews, not at all. He was referring to that group in the audience that had been attacking the Palestinian ambassador.
Well, we could debate that, Roberto, absolutely. What we don't need to debate is the fact that he has spent an extraordinary amount of time sharing platforms, laying wreaths and mixing with people directly involved in terrorism.
Yes, absolutely true. And of course, it is almost inevitable because he has always promoted the dialogue with groups like the ANC, which of course was also regarded as a terrorist group at some point, with Sinn Féin, which was also being regarded as close to the IRA. And yet, history vindicated him in the fact that Sinn Féin now has got MPs in the British Parliament.
They've had them since 1918. They've had MPs since 1918. Roberto, there are many that think he spent far too much time with people who behaved pretty horrendously. And I do understand the argument that you get cases of people who one day are regarded terrorists and the next are regarded as freedom fighters. But I struggle when John McDonnell tells me that somehow Jeremy Corbyn is a peace broker in the Middle East. I really struggle with that.
Well, I don't. I mean, as you heard the earlier speaker, I mean, he has promoted a dialogue with Jewish groups as well as Palestinian groups. He doesn't get the headlines, of course, and for many, many years he was on the fringe of the Labour Party.
He was for decades.
Exactly, absolutely right. So many people are simply not aware of all the legwork he's put into promoting dialogue between groups that previously had been at loggerheads.
OK, Roberto, thank you. On Twitter I get, please let someone through who's pro-Corbyn. I think we've had more pro-Corbyn callers in the last half hour than we've had anti-Corbyn callers, because I want people to hear both sides of this argument. Let's go to Henry in Macclesfield. Good morning, Henry.
Good morning. I must admit, my view on it is effectively, I think that it's wrong in a democracy that people from either side can't have different opinions.
Certainly.
My experience, because I used to help Esther McVey when she was the MP for Tatton, was that the far left set up cyber groups such as on Twitter and troll MPs. And obviously we're talking about the party, but is it a nasty party? The honest answer is I think that's for people to jump to their own conclusions with.
Well, Henry, I said earlier, Henry, like you, campaigning on the ground with some of these hard left groups campaigning against you, they are really nasty and really vicious, and not just to me as a candidate in fighting various elections, but even to the public that turn up at the meetings. They're really nasty. Isn't the problem, Henry, that they've now taken over the Labour Party?
Yes, I think that is a problem. And I think they gave themselves, when they changed their internal vote system, if I remember correctly.
Well, it was it was basically £3 members, wasn't it? Ed Miliband trying to broaden the party membership. It was £3 members, and they flooded in and they voted for Corbyn.
Yeah, I mean, effectively that's what happened. But I remember campaigning out in Wirral West for when Esther was campaigning in that horrendous election. I remember getting trolled and followed around by the far left on the campaign.
Yeah, and they are nasty.
And they are nasty. And I remember advising Esther on her Twitter, social media, until very recently. And effectively, I said to her, you just got to ignore them and just get on with doing what you're doing.
But it's hard, isn't it?
It is hard, and it's all the abuse.
Mind you, Henry, the far right have got some pretty nasty characters too, haven't they?
Both sides of the extreme have nasty characters. I'm not going to say they don't.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, it's important in democracy that you can accept other people's views and opinions. I may not agree with Labour people, but I can accept their view and move on. And the problem that I think we had was when I was growing up in the Tony Blair era, I remember that as a kid, there was no teaching of respecting other people's views and opinions. And I didn't understand that you have to respect people's opinions.
Well, I think we have moved as a country way too far in a direction that stops proper critical thinking and understanding there are two reasonable sides to every argument. Henry, thank you. I've got time for one last quick caller. Haven't got long. Elliot, new to the show from Nottingham. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I have to say, it does seem to me that the hard left have hijacked Labour.
I wouldn't say so, Nigel, at all. I mean, if you look at what's going on in the party, I think most people could actually see it's just an orchestrated campaign by the mainstream media against Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, the only people that need to be scared of Jeremy Corbyn is big business that are not paying their tax, the Amazon, Googles and Starbucks of this world. They're the people that need to be scared of Jeremy Corbyn. Everyone else is entitled is entitled in Labour. I mean, the whole £3 membership of the party is less than 5% of Labour Party members. We've got 500,000 members.
What I'm going to say, but hang on a second, Elliot. It wasn't 500,000 members 5 years ago, was it?
No, exactly. It wasn't 500,000 members. Jeremy Corbyn, being leader of the Labour Party, has grown the membership of the party, so it's more representative of the country, which unfortunately means there are going to be a very few minority people in the party with very extreme views, and views that most of the other members wouldn't agree with. But we're happy to have that debate with them, and we need to have that open dialogue with them.
So to you, Elliot, Corbyn's not an extremist?
No, Corbyn's not an extremist. At the end of the day, if you look at the last Labour manifesto, which was overwhelmingly backed by, a lot of people in the country and done better than anyone in the party actually thought was possible. I don't really see.
All right, Elliot. No, look. I've had lots of you this morning. Like Elliot, you've defended Corbyn. There are many who will not. This media story will not go away any time soon, and a lot of people do now believe Labour look like the nasty party.